the votes that will take about an hour, presuming on your time. And maybe Ms. Bass can come back too. I'm not sure what her schedule might be. But let me ask some very quick questions. First of all, Mr. Akwe, I think your point about a window closing is a very, very important one. If the international community coalesces and somehow accepts the egregious human rights abuses as okay, if a little changes around the edges may bring about, you know, a great deal of positive feedback from the international community, which has not been helpful, and that includes during the Bush administration as well as now during the Obama administration. And I would suggest that for those who are suffering torture and those who 400 plus political prisoners and everyone else who is suffering, delay is denial. You said it very well. Political will, I would say, paraphrasing you, is a decision which can be made, and that's what leadership is all about. You don't lead from behind, you lead by being the Prime Minister who says, we are going to change this. I would announce today we are going to reintroduce the Ethiopia Human Rights Act with very serious benchmarks. And the balance that the administration, thank you, please sit. The balance that the administration spoke about, which I think is unbalanced, and again, I agree with combating the HIV/AIDS pandemic and all the other humanitarian initiatives, but the political side, the changes, the good governance, is absolutely a prerequisite, as was said by Mr. Gast as well, to the sustainability of all of those other programs as well. The Charities and Societies Proclamation Law, the CS Law, that is an outrage. The journalist point that Dr. Nega, I should say, talked about, I mean, you suffered in prison. You know what it's like. You know what fellow inmates suffered at the hands of malice, and people continue to do so today. When you pointed out that Ethiopia is the leading jailer of journalists, and I hope the media takes note of this, in sub-Saharan Africa and ranks among the top 10 in the world. That has to change. An unfettered press keeps checks on this Congress, on this president. It needs to do the same in Ethiopia. So thank you for your testimonies. They were very, very strong. You said, Dr. Pham, tantalizing. I would hope that, you know, for Mr. Haile Mariam, or Prime Minister Haile Mariam, things will move in the right direction. But friends don't let friends commit human rights abuses. And we have waited. I have waited, and Greg, we've talked about this. When do we do an Ethiopia hearing? We had hoped that there would be changes sooner rather than later. And as you said, Dr. Akwe, that window is closing, and it's not closing, it's not opening to reforms, and that's what we need to fight for. So thank you so much. Ms. Bass.
Yes, and I'm so sorry that we do have to leave to go to votes, and unfortunately I won't be able to return. But, and I'm hoping, though, that maybe we can have another hearing on Ethiopia soon to follow up with this. You know, Dr. Nega, you mentioned a term that sent chills up me, frankly, which was constructive engagement, because I think I've heard that term before. And so that's a very chilling notion. I wanted to know, though, if you would comment on a couple of things that Dr. Pham said. You know, you certainly pointed out all of the difficulties, but you did say that you thought it was a little bright light that their organized opposition was allowed, the protests that just happened, and I guess there's a window that there could be more protests in the future, and then also higher education. And I wanted to know if you could just comment on those. And let me just say that I just really appreciate everybody's participation and everything, and I just hope that we'll be able to return and have a more lengthy hearing.
Thank you. Let me just very quickly say something before I go into the specific question about the statistics and the data that you hear about the improvements and things of that sort. I would like to suggest to anyone who is dealing with Ethiopia to be very, very cautious about what kind of numbers they are playing. I mean, according to official data right now, Ethiopia has less poverty than Mexico. It has less poverty than Botswana. It has less poverty than a number of European countries. That is official data. You know, in 2010, they came up with a number in one region, in Afar, where they said 5 million kids are going to school that year. the total population of Afar is 1.4 million. That's how absurd this data is. And that is the kind of numbers that you hear these international experts come up and then talk about how things are improving. I would really, it is very hazardous. I'm an economist by training, and I know how these numbers are put together. So it would be better to be careful about that, cautious about that. But to the question about improvements, I really want you to take something very, very seriously, Ms. Bass. What I see is conflict. What I see is war. What I see is a civil war coming to Ethiopia.
Okay.
In fact, that's one of the reasons why I want to testify today, and I want you to take this seriously.
Okay.
Because this country is not going into the same way that it has gone over the last 21 years. I think people are fed up. I think people are going to fight, and nobody can blame people for fighting against tyranny. That is where it's going.
Do you think that there is an organized, do you think the opposition is organized enough to actually wage that?
I do believe that the opposition...
Conflicts in the existing government.
Yes,
then.
I do believe that the opposition that was fractured has started to seriously talk about mounting a unified challenge. That's what is going to happen. And that's why I'm trying to be more, you know, if you might call it alarmist, in the sense that if people in the policy-making apparatus think that you can just keep going the way you are going about it, a surprise is coming to you.
Okay.
That is a very, very dangerous game that people are playing. So that's why I say, you know, did they allow this demonstration recently? They did. But are they going to allow in the future? I don't think they will.
So one more quick question. I know when I talk to my constituents, they believe that we should cut off all foreign aid. And I feel a little conflicted over that, considering the humanitarian challenges, the food insecurity, the HIV, and maybe, you know, other panelists could comment about that. Is that what the U.S. should do? End all foreign aid? Yes.
I think that the U.S. has a leverage. And the leverage that the money that we're giving, I think that earlier when we hear from the U.S. aid, they are saying that they give $300 million for a democratic process. Where? Where is democratic process? In a country where we know that, you know, almost every seat is held by the same government. So that kind of funding going for that, that's not going to go and help the poor Ethiopian. That is helping the regime. There's a leverage that this money that we give for the regime, you know, there are a lot of money that which is really not going to the people. The money that go for the people, we should give it to the people. The second thing too is lack of transparency and accountability. And this is a clear cut that most of the time people don't talk about this. Just recent examples. People were displaced in the west part of Ethiopia. The World Bank inspector final want to investigate. The Ethiopian government, they don't want to cooperate with the World Banks. Just like me giving you give me the money to feed my family. You say, did you feed my family? I say, none of your business. So there is a way that the funding, when I say earlier, we need the U.S. support. This has been done in Burma. It's been done in other places. There's no political space. There's no really any media at all in Ethiopia. The journalists are being accused as a terrorist. People who are activists, just like me, like in Ethiopia, for example, leave alone me, even all of these journalists, if they were in Ethiopia, they will be accused of journalists. For me, I never held a gun, I never talk about any war or anything, but the Ethiopian government labeled me among the 24 people who were labels. I was one of them, just because I speak the rights. So the point is going back to what Dr. Brown said. Before it go to war, Ethiopian people are suffering enough. Reconciliation can be done. The people in Ethiopia, there are some moderate within the government, there's some moderate within the opposition. That if the U.S. take that initiative, we had enough blood, the HIV and lack of food is killing us, we cannot kill each other. But what we are asking is, reconciliation is possible, it's never been tried before, and there's no way why we cannot do it.
Thank you. Thank you.
Again, I apologize. If you could hold that. We're out of time for voting, so Ms. Bass and I have to run over to vote. There's 7 votes and 8. Dr. Nega, thank you for your patience. I, again, deeply apologize for these interruptions with votes. We have been joined by Congressman Stockman, who has been a leader on African issues, a new member, but not a new member to this work. He's back, return trip to the House, and I yield to my good friend.
Thank you for coming out. I'm really serious about thank you for your patience. We normally don't have that many votes in a row. But I've been to your beautiful country, and I appreciate you coming out today. And we always have in this committee very good staff, very good people, and an excellent chairman. I'm biased, but I think he's a great chairman. But one of the things we always like to hear from the witnesses is how we can help you achieve goals in your country. Sometimes Americans are interpreted as being too interventionists, where we're criticized if we go in, such as Iraq, and then now we're criticized for not going in Syria. So we're kind of damned if we do, damned if we don't. So we want to get from you what the proper temperature we should do and what kind of things we can do to facilitate freedom in your country. It's disappointing that it's gone this way in this direction and that you had to suffer so deeply. So I will yield to you the direction you should give us.
Thank you, Congressman Stockman. I understand perfectly how realistic politics is a difficult business. I mean, it's not an easy thing. Intervention always have a problem, especially if it has something to do with intervening by force and things of that sort. What we are talking about now is the degree to which the American taxpayers' money can be used to affect some of the basic principles and values that this country holds dear. Unfortunately, what has been going on in Ethiopia is that U.S. taxpayers' money is being used to shore up a dictatorship that's so brutal that raises quite a lot of questions in the minds of Ethiopians that, you know, this is not the America that we know. This is not the America that we understand. And U.S.-America relationships, as you know, goes a long way. Although some people really understand the realistic issues that are involved in terms of national security reasons in the region and things of that sort, what people don't understand is where is it that countries would start to say enough is enough. Now, and what I submitted today is this is not just about Ethiopia and humanitarian issues in Ethiopia. Now it has become a serious geostrategic issue for the United States because Ethiopia is roughly about 90 million people, the largest country in the region. A destabilized Ethiopia is going to destabilize that whole region. It's a very serious issue, and all U.S. strategic interests are going to be affected by what happens in Ethiopia. So the question is, if we let things go the way they are, would we at least achieve the strategic objectives of the U.S., which in this case means a stable Ethiopia that can support the anti-terrorist struggle in the region? And the answer that I can give is, unfortunately, the way things are going, that's not going to happen. Because Ethiopia itself is going to be destabilized, because after 21 years, people have become so traumatized. People have literally given up hope that there is a possibility of peaceful transition, that there is now more recourse towards armed resistance against the state. Now, you can imagine, once armed resistance starts, you don't even know which direction it takes. I mean, if there is anything about Syria that we can talk about, it started as a peaceful resistance. The state refused to relinquish power. One thing leads to another. People start to get fed up, and they go into this. Then, at that point, you don't even know who is which one you are going to be able to do.
I have a limited time. I guess I'm asking you, if you were in my shoes and you were given us guidance on a bill we could write, what would you recommend that we put in that bill to facilitate a positive outcome in Ethiopia?
A very clear, targeted, time-bound set of issues that leads towards meaningful democratization, in the absence of which U.S. foreign aid to Ethiopia would be seriously endangered. That's number one. Two, the U.S. work with other allies, especially the European Union, towards this objective, because Ethiopia is really amenable to financial pressure. This is not a government that could just brush away, although they say this always that, you can't take your money and, we can tell you what, that is not a government that can allow that. So use your financial support to the government to good end. Use it to affect substantive change in the behavior of the state. That's what I was saying.
Do you think a delegation from the United States would impact if we visited there and said we have these concerns?
If the statement is very clear, if it is something that can back it up. I mean, this is not the last delegation that will go to the U.S. I mean, Congressman Smith has been there repeatedly, Donald Penn has been there. I mean, there are Congress people going always. The point is, they will always tell you exactly what you want to hear. And the minute you leave, they go on behaving the way they are behaving. Unless otherwise you have a tangible set of measures that you would take, unless otherwise X, Y, and Z happen. And in that case, what we are saying is then our money, our taxpayers' money is not going to be used for this. You can do whatever you want. We will not intervene militarily or anything, but our money will not be used unless otherwise X, Y, Z. Release prisoners. We'll give you X amount of time. Introduce a series of reforms.
Release the press that they have.
The press that the government owns that is not used for anything else. Respect your constitution. Just respect the constitution that you have written.
We're trying to get that done here.
I understand. But, there are several, the National Election Board, these institutions, the justice system, there are things that can be done to actually introduce a set of reforms so that people can start to play by the rules.
The intervention in Somalia, how much does that affect the economy and the budget of Ethiopia?
You mean, I don't think that was fought from Ethiopia's purses.
Well, I understand there's, you have some soldiers in another country. How much does that cost the government?
But I don't think the Ethiopian government pays for it.
Oh, you think the United States does?
I can tell you that the Ethiopian government is not. In almost every place that the Ethiopian army is, it is either the UN or the US or somebody else paying.
Well, even the UN, I think we end up paying for it.
Exactly. Indirectly, we start paying for it. Yes.
So it's not coming out of the pocket. There's no impact on the budget. Okay, but except for life and time and material.
Yeah.
So your suggestion is if I understand correctly, if I hear you correctly, is that we say if you don't have free elections, release the press, release the prisoners, then we will cut it by a third by next year. We'll cut it by another third the year after that, and then cut it all off if you don't receive it in 3 years or something like that.
Yeah.
Timetable. We would direct the State Department and other agencies to that effect.
Yes, and very importantly coordinated with other allies, particularly the European Union. When we talk to the European Union, they always say that the US has to take a lead on this. That if the US takes a leadership position on this, the European Union follows, then literally that's the whole aid money that's going to the country. And it's not going to happen. Trust me, it's not going to take a year or two before the government starts responding. Because they cannot survive without that aid money. They just can't.
Okay. Well, that's helpful because as we're... I think you need to take a stand. I appreciate the audience's participation too, but I'm glad you're directing us because honestly, from this side of the table, we can't do it without input from people that have been there and know what's going on. And we don't want to go too far one way or not doing anything. And I really appreciate you taking your time and staying so long. I yield back.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Let me just ask some final questions and then ask you if you have any final comments you'd like to make. How would you assess President Obama's assessment of the situation on the ground and his policies, particularly as it relates to human rights and governance?
Well, I think for the Ethiopian community in general, President Obama's policy has been a bit of a disappointment in the sense that, if you remember the first few speeches that the president has made in relation to freedom and liberty and democracy in Africa, I mean, the Ghana speech, and everybody was hoping that a new day is going to come in Africa, because we all know at the end of the day, even the economic issues that we face are directly tied to these issues of governance and human rights and things like that. So everybody thought not only our politics is going to change, not only human rights is going to be respected, but even prosperity can come, corruption can be tackled. You know, when you have an accountable government, a whole host of issues. So everybody was hoping that President Obama would follow on what he has said, and one of the biggest disappointments for most Ethiopians, I would say, is precisely the fact that it has become an administration that cannot follow on what it promises to do, and it's always disappointing when you hear that.
Let me just ask you with regards to the, as you know, for 21 years, and you've mentioned that yourself, Ethiopia has been headed by a minority ethnic group. After being in power for the past 21 years, it is well positioned to remain in power without the leadership of an internationally known prime minister. How do you see the ethnic politics in Ethiopia playing out in the years to come? You've talked about this cauldron. Are we missing the signs? You know, we missed them in Egypt. When you know, the people took to the streets in Egypt, I heard euphoria at the State Department and at the White House and here in Congress. I said, this is the bridge of the Muslim Brotherhood, and I held 3 hearings on Egypt and about how Islamists would crowd out moderate Muslims very quickly, as well as Coptic Christians, and sure enough now Egypt is far worse than it was under Mubarak. And I'm wondering, you know, I don't see that kind of thing happening in terms of a Muslim Islamist type of, although there are always threats. I know that all of us would like to see, you know, a peaceful, absolutely peaceful transformation. But if we miss the signs and don't take the steps that we need to take, unwittingly, I think we can enable that. What's your view?
There are two parts to this, Congressman Smith. One is on the side of what the government is doing, and the other one is on the side of what the people in general are doing. For the government, it was part of its raison d'etre to divide people along ethnicity, along religious lines, because the only way that a minority government, a government that represents 6% of the population, ruling strictly on the basis of ethnicity, strictly. I mean, this is a government that says your identity is your ethnicity. You cannot even say you are an Ethiopian. You have to say you are from a particular race. This is the politics that they have introduced into this country. The only way that they can survive with that kind of policy was if they could divide the society. So purposely, calculatively, they have divided society so that one ethnic group would be against the other. Now, the chickens are coming home to roost. You know, this has now stayed for over 20 years. People have started to think of themselves in terms of ethnic grounds, and they try to foment conflict. Recently, as you have seen, they kicked out Amharas from the Benishangul and the southern region so that deliberately there is that hostility. That is the bad part. If things go the way the government wants them to go, Ethiopia is in a very, very treacherous, dangerous course. The good sign, on the other hand, is on the side of the public. Despite all this repeated, deliberate fomentation of hatred and difference, people keep saying, no, we still want to keep our country peaceful. We still want to live with other ethnic groups in peace. All we want is our rights to be respected. The other very good thing that's happening is that at least among the opposition, we have started for the first time hearing that these different ethnic-based organizations have come together and say, at the end of the day, what we want is a real democracy in our country. If a real democracy comes, then this ethnic conflict can be seriously addressed. So those are the two trends that are taking place. And my hope is that the opposition gathers the strength so that it can stop this deliberate conflict that's being created by the government.
Earlier today, Amnesty International's representative, Mr. Akwe, spoke at great length, particularly in his written submission, about the use of torture. And I'm wondering, I've raised torture many times. I've written laws to combat torture, raised it in our our Ethiopia Human Rights Act, as one of the conditionalities. Why were people so disbelieving, or why did they look askance? I'm talking about our own government under President Bush, as well as under President Obama. It's there in black and white, and it seems to get looked over. We look askance. Why is that?
I honestly, Congressman Smith, I honestly think to a certain degree it's part of human nature. You want to believe what you want to believe. You want to believe not the facts on the ground, not what you see, but what you think is the thing that you need to believe in order to do what you are doing continuously. The U.S. administration has historically been interested in Ethiopia on security and other grounds. The U.S. administration wants to continue the relationship with Ethiopia. In order to do that, it has to come to terms with this issue of a brutal regime that is torturing its own people, that's killing its own people. Then how do you measure the two? Usually the human mind, I think, plays tricks on you. Then you say, it's not happening, or you try to ignore it. You try to think as if it is not happening. It is denied. That is exactly what is going on in the policy-making circles of the United States and Europe. They just don't want to believe what they see, because then they have to do something about it. Then they have to do something real about it. And they can't do anything real about it. They don't want to do anything real about it.
Let me ask you, you spent some considerable time in your testimony on interference in religious affairs, and you talked about the manipulation of the leadership and patriarch of the Orthodox Church. Could you expound upon that? Because that is a very serious assertion, and it seems to me that we do have the International Religious Freedom Act. There is both a commission which has written about these issues before relative to Ethiopia. It would seem to me this should be an engraved invitation to do it again to them. And we also have the Earth Office at the U.S. Department of State. In your view, how bad is it?
Oh, it really is bad. I mean, it's bad to the point where I think the U.S. institution that deals with religious freedom recently had a hearing, I think, on the issue of the Muslims. And for the first time, openly acknowledged that this was a result of gross interference. In fact, deliberate counting, as if, because when you say Muslim and terrorism, the two come together, and the Ethiopian government thinks that by calling them terrorists, while actually taking away their own religion and trying to impose its will on them. With the Orthodox Church, this is the first time in Ethiopian history that the Orthodox Church is openly split into two. There is the patriarch elected by the government and its supporters, and exiled patriarch. As you know, the basic rule in the Ethiopian Orthodox Church is you don't change the patriarch till the patriarch dies. And this government came and changed the patriarch while he was still alive. And the patriarch left, and he has now created, around him another synodos where most people in the diaspora are now. This is the first time in Ethiopian history that the Ethiopian Orthodox Church was purposely split. The same thing they are trying to do with the Muslims. This is, as I said in my written statement, it is a government that is allergic to the existence of any independent body. Whether it's religious, they have to be under their control. That's what they are doing. Unfortunately, as you know, religion is a very sensitive thing. As you push people, then they start to resist. That's exactly what the Muslims are doing. That's what we will expect that the Christians will be doing too.
Two final questions. Sure. The Charities and Societies Proclamation Law, which I think gets very little notice in Washington, gets some, but it seems to me it ought to get much more because it does have anti-terrorism. And under the rubric of terrorism, a whole lot of bad things can be pushed. Could you, to the committee, tell us what you think is the worst aspects of that law?
The worst, if I have to pick one worst aspect, there is 5 areas in the law that deals with any institution that deals with human rights, that deals with children's rights, that deals with reconciliation, that deals with, I forgot the other two. Anything that has to do with human rights and any institution that deals with these issues cannot get foreign funding. Period. Now, anybody who knows Ethiopia, all NGOs, all these institutions operate on the basis of projects that they put to foreign donors. All of them are closed now. 90% of these institutions are closed. So, if I have to pick one terrible aspect of this law, it is the fact that everything that has to do with human rights and good governance is completely out from Ethiopia. But let me say one last point about this. It is very important, Congressman Smith, to realize that the Charities and Societies Proclamation is one part of a broader capture of institutions in Ethiopia. There cannot be independent institutions so far as government is in power. They cannot allow independent institutions. That is what this law is about.
Let me ask you, yesterday the U.S. Department of State, in a very, very important ceremony, and I was there with Secretary of State Curry, released the newest, this year's version of the Trafficking in Persons report. Parenthetically, I'm the author of the law that created the authorization of that report and many other aspects on combating human trafficking. It's known as the Trafficking Victims Protection Act of 2000. Ethiopia was given a Tier 2 rating, which means that it has a serious problem with trafficking, but it is making or taking actions to combat it. And I myself have been in at least one of the USAID supported shelters in Addis on one of my trips there. So I know we are trying to provide aid to help the victims and to more effectively end trafficking there. Have you had the time, and I know it only came out yesterday, so you might want to take this question and take a look at the monologue or the narrative that's in the book, the TIP report. But are you satisfied that, and I would have hoped to have asked some of our other witnesses as well, with that rating because the same rating when we had our hearing in 2006 was Tier 2 for Ethiopia. Are they making progress, serious and sustained?
Congressman, this is in fact, I think it was last week that the Ethiopian government officially, for the first time, talked about the problem of human trafficking officially, for the first time. And the Ethiopian government, including the Prime Minister, were on TV saying, this is the fault of those who are living because they don't know how good they have it in Ethiopia. That was their understanding of what actually is going on when tens of thousands of Ethiopian young women go to these Middle Eastern countries, while some of them were thrown from 3-4 stairs, killed, raped. And this is what the government knew was going on. If you go to the Ethiopian Immigration Authority office, the line that you find is kilometers of these young women coming from rural areas, urban areas, trying to get the hell out of that place. And there are officially recognized institutions that are actually doing this. Government-owned, government-sponsored institutions. So they talk about human trafficking, and anybody believes that they are really against human trafficking? It really is mind-boggling how the West wants to believe this when actually thousands, tens of thousands of people are living in the country under organized trafficking of human beings.
Final question. In the 2 years lead up to the so-called Arab Spring, when Egypt went from Mubarak to Morsi, the amount of money the U.S. government dedicated to civil society and democracy dropped significantly. And it's a matter of record. Many of us complained, yes, foreign aid has been cut, so there are difficult choices that often need to be made. But I asked earlier today about the balance that Ambassador Yamamoto and Mr. East, Carl Gast, I should say, talked about. That in 2013 we're spending $351 million in total aid given to Ethiopia, $1 million of which is for civil society. And now That's a Congressional Research Service number, and maybe there's further explanation for that. Maybe it's more, but that's their number. I'm wondering, and I did ask that question, whether that shows some disproportionality and perhaps a lack of focus on building up civil society as a bulwark from authoritarianism or worse.
What they don't tell you in the testimony, the numbers tell. The 1 million out of the 350 million tells a much bigger story than what they will tell you. Because I think the international community has given up on the possibility of change through civil society institutions. I think after the Charities proclamation, they have said there is nothing you can do around. In fact, Congressman, that's exactly why I said, if you look at the lay of the land in Ethiopia, the possibility of change through a peaceful mechanism, through using civil society institutions is gone. That's why the West has stopped funding them. That's why the whole thing is moving into, so for Ethiopians, any talk that there could be any change to that route is gone. So the choice that they have is either you fight to protect your liberty or to get your liberty, or you die as a slave. You die as a subject. And that's why I said, so far as I know, I don't think Ethiopians are going to accept tyranny forever. I think the little hints that we were seeing in 2005 is now gone. The possibility of change through a peaceful mechanism. The money that you quoted is simply a reflection of that. Everybody has given up. They will tell you all kinds of things. Yeah, we are working on it on this side. The money says there is no work done for this building civil society, towards democratization in any form or shape. They have given up. The only thing that is left for Ethiopians, that's why, is to fight. There is nothing else left. That's why this policy, while they look at it, it is going in that route, and they cannot do anything about it. That's what's sad about it. It really is sad.
Hopefully there is, as Amnesty's witness said, while the window is closing, that there is still time. And I think it behooves us on this committee to redouble our efforts, and I will. We hope to work with a large number of people and get input on benchmarks and reintroduce, as I said before, the Ethiopia Human Rights Act. And I would like to, before I close the hearing,
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just want to say thank you for taking your time doing this. There's 435 members, and I'm honored to serve with you on this. I'm really touched that we're going to make a real impact in the world. I'm just honored to be here with you. Thanks.
Thank you so much. I say to my friend and colleague, I would, without objection, ask Jan Simpson two testimonies be included in the record. And I would like to give you the final word, and then this hearing is adjourned.
I'm very quickly, Congressman, I have no word to thank you about what you have done and what you would do. And let me assure you, this is not just about Ethiopia. This is about the U.S. interests. And it's very important that people realize that this is about U.S. strategic interests. An unstable Ethiopia is going to be a very dangerous place. But that's where we're heading. So, if something is going to be happening, it has to happen soon. It has to happen as quickly as possible. Because people have waited for 21 years. I have no basis to believe that they will continue to wait for that moment. So what you have started in terms of introducing this legislation, I think is going to be very important. I hope it has a bite. I hope it's not just that. I hope it has a very clear, as I said, clear benchmarks, clear measurable elements in it. And in doing so, you have, or you will be contributing to maybe a peaceful transition to democracy. But at least you have done your part. At least you have done your part. Thank you.
Thank you. The hearing is adjourned. Thank you.